Welcome to True Set Free. This is a Q&A show that we do at Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities. My name is Matt. This is Pastor Steve Whinery. He's our senior pastor here at Calvary. If you have questions, you can email me, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text me, leave a voicemail, 707-872-7677. If you guys are watching, just post on the comments below, YouTube or Facebook. These guys will get it to me and try and get you on the show. If you have prayer requests, Pastor Steve will pray for you, post those. And any praise reports, love to hear from you guys, where you're watching from. It's cool to see you guys around the country, around the world, actually. I don't really have any announcements. Do you have something that is on your mind?
We're gonna do a baptism this week. This coming up Sunday. And so if you want to get baptized, then come on out. We'll be doing it after third service. So we do it on the last service.
It's like perfect baptismal weather.
Yeah, it's starting to get a little cooler. Let's see what happens.
All right. Good to go. You ready to jump in?
Yep.
All right, my first question is from Mr. Kyle. He says, does the dead in Christ in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 include Old Testament saints?
Okay, so in the passage, so everybody knows what's going on, it's talking about the rapture of the church, or the resurrection. And so it says, this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout and with the voice of an archangel and with the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words. It's a cool promise, and we believe that that's going to take place unexpectedly, like Jesus said, and before any of the signs that you have in the book of Revelation. Otherwise it wouldn't be unexpected. I don't think that this can be something that's taken place at the second coming, specifically because Jesus told us to be looking for him, not for the Antichrist. And so that's one of the reasons I'm a pre-trib guy. That's called the pre-trib rapture. And so what happens at that point is people who are believers and are alive are taken out of here without ever dying, and those who've died in Christ, their bodies are restored to their spirits, who God, it says in verse 14, will bring with him all those who sleep in Jesus, and it's talking about all those who've died. And so their bodies are reunited, and so they're resurrected first, and then we caught up together with them in the clouds. And so again, the straight off statement is pretty straightforward. They're the dead in Christ. And so obviously that's talking about everybody down through the last couple of thousand years who've given their lives to Jesus. But then there comes in this issue of, what do you do with Old Testament saints? Old Testament believers who've died and gone to heaven, because their bodies haven't been resurrected yet. And we know that everybody's going to be resurrected. And so Jesus in John chapter 5, without making this a big old long thing, talked about the resurrection of the righteous and the resurrection of the unrighteous. And so everybody's getting resurrected. With the resurrection of the righteous, there's a couple of different resurrections. And so this is one, and there is another one after the second coming. And that's over in Revelation chapter 20. And in that passage, it says, you have Jesus coming in chapter 19. He destroys the beast and his army and casts the beast and the false prophet into the lake of fire. Then there's an angel that comes and binds Satan in chains and puts him and his demon buddies into the abyss for 1,000 years. And it says in verse 3 that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. And then in verse 4, it says, and I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. And so you have the resurrection of believing Jews and Gentiles who died during the tribulation period. And so that's the previous 7 years, and didn't take the mark and so on. And so there's a question as to when the Old Testament believers are raised from the dead, and that's what Kyle's question is about. And so some people believe that David and Elijah and all those guys, well, it wouldn't be Elijah because Elijah has to come back. So David, I need to leave out Elijah. So David and Samuel and all those guys, Samson and all those guys would be raised, whether they would be raised at the rapture or raised at this point right here. The reason that this point is important is because the whole previous 7 years are the last 7 years of Jewish history. So in Daniel chapter 9, and again, I'm getting into the weeds here, I'm sorry, but in Daniel chapter 9, Gabriel gives an outline of the last 490 years of God dealing with the nation of Israel. And 483 of those years lead up to the death of Jesus. And then, actually, they lead up to the presentation of Jesus at the triumphal entry. That's what they lead up to. And then after that, Jesus dies, the city and the sanctuary are destroyed, and then there's a dispersion of the Jewish nation, and that lasts over 1,900 years, almost 2,000 years. And then the last 7 years are the Great Tribulation period. Well, that's all Jewish history. And so what God did with the church was he started after the triumphal entry, and he brings in this new thing where Jews and Gentiles come into the church, and for the next 1,900, 2,000 years, we have the church, and you don't have God dealing with the Jewish nation specifically. And then the last 7 years, God does it again. And so it's a real natural thing to, when you're going to raise people who are saved during that last 7 year dispensation, if they're raised during that time, that's like Old Testament. Revelation's like Old Testament. And so if they're raised, if the people who died during that period are raised, then it makes sense that not only would they be raised, but all the Old Testament saints would be raised there. And so that's one of the places that people put the resurrection of the Old Testament saints, and that's why they do that. Is that clear as mud?
Yeah, well, probably for them, I don't know why it's muddy in my mind, but when you have the 487 years, obviously, or 483 years, sorry, obviously the 7 years would be the Great Tribulation, equals 490. If Christ was that 483rd year, what was the start of that? What was the starting point?
Well, it's more of an ending point. So what
But how do we get that number is my question.
It's 173,880 days after
it's that whole huge one broken down.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
After the announcement, after the proclamation that the walls should be rebuilt of Jerusalem.
So then we're in a pause, and then the Great Tribulation would complete that 490 years, which would bring in Israel, which would make sense for the Old Testament's being raptured at that time.
Right.
When you read Revelation 20...
And actually, they wouldn't even be raptured, they'd be raised.
That's what I meant, resurrected.
Yeah,
So in Revelation 20, it says that's the first, take part in the first resurrection, but isn't that in the context of the resurrection with the Old Testament saints? Wouldn't that be the second resurrection?
Now, second resurrection is the resurrection to death. And so...
so then what's the resurrection for us?
Resurrection for us is the first one.
And that's what that's talking about?
Nope.
Okay, that's where I'm confused.
Yeah. And so the first resurrection is, all through Scripture, the description of the resurrections are two. There's only two. And so it's the resurrection of the just, and the resurrection of the unjust, or the resurrection of the righteous, and the resurrection of the wicked.
Okay.
And so you see that over and over, right? And so the problem with the resurrection of the just is that there's not just one resurrection of the just.
That's where I messed up.
That's the issue.
There's two firsts.
Yeah, there's two firsts. Yeah, actually, there's a couple of different firsts. So you have the resurrection of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So is he just?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have the resurrection of the Old Testament believers who were raised with Jesus at the same time.
Okay.
They're the ones who were walking around in Jerusalem. That weird passage in in Matthew, 25, 56, something like that. And so they got raised too at the same time. So would they be just or unjust?
Just.
Yeah, that would be the just. And then the next resurrection that you would have is the resurrection of in the rapture of the church, and so that's the believers in Jesus, and so that's a resurrection of the just too, right? And then you have a resurrection of the two witnesses in the tribulation period, and so that would be the resurrection of the just also. Those guys are just. And then you have the resurrection of those who died during the tribulation period. So you've got a number of resurrections that are taking place, and those are all called the first resurrection. And the reference there is to the resurrection of the just. The second resurrection is after the 1,000 years, and that's the resurrection where they all stand before the great white throne,
right.
and the ones that are left there are unbelievers. And so that's the resurrection of the unjust.
So for all those options, what is your opinion? Where do you fall for the Old Testament saints?
Well, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
Because there's another passage. Okay, so that's the argument for putting it after the tribulation period, and we know that they have to be raised during that time because David becomes the king of Israel during the millennium. So in the Old Testament, in the book of Ezekiel, it talks about David ruling in Jerusalem. And so obviously Christ is going to be above him, but David's going to be ruling in Jerusalem. And so
in the millennium.
In the millennium.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Over in Isaiah chapter 26, this is an interesting passage, and it says this: "Your dead shall live together with my dead body," Isaiah speaking. "They shall arise, awake and sing, you who dwell in dust, for your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead." So that looks like a resurrection. And then you have the Lord speaking, saying, "Come, my people, enter into your chambers, and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation is past. For behold, the Lord comes out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth will also disclose her blood, and will no more cover her slain." And so the indignation in that passage looks like it's a reference to, the tribulation period. And so here you have a situation where people come, and it looks like to the Lord. Jesus said, "I'm going to my Father's house, and if I go to my Father's house, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and that where I am you may be also. In my Father's house are many dwelling places," so like chambers. And it looks like it's an invitation to Old Testament saints to come to the chambers that the Lord's prepared for them, shut the doors behind them until the indignation is past, and then the Lord's going to come out and judge the earth. And so that's a passage that looks like it might take place at the rapture of the church. So a pre-trib resurrection of Old Testament saints. And so my answer is, I don't know. That one looks pretty good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one looks pretty good to me. But again,
so that would have them resurrected with us at the same time.
Yeah. So the one is an argument from basically God's work with the people of Israel, and placing the resurrection of the people of Israel at the same time as the resurrection of the last of what you could call the Old Testament saints. Because during Revelation, you're basically going back to Old Testament times.
Right.
Jews and Gentiles getting saved. And there's a distinction between the two.
There you have it.
Yeah. So my answer is, I don't know. All that to say, I don't know.
Kyle's my buddy. He sent me this, and I'm like, that's a silly question. This is easy. And then he goes, well, that's a good question. I'm like, why is that a good question? Yeah. Then you unfold those options. I'm like, that's a good question.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on there than I thought. All right. There you go, Kyle. Appreciate you. All right. My next one is from Isaac, I think. This is his. Could I get some help with context of Galatians 6, 1 through 5? Verses 2 through 5 is where I'm having trouble understanding everything. It seems to be two separate ideas that don't really fit together. Verse 2 says to bear one another one another's burdens. But verse 5 says for each to bear his own load. And then everything is in between those verses just has me a bit lost. Could you please help me bring everything together?
Okay. Let me read them to you. It says, Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks himself to be something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another, for each one shall bear his own load. And so the answer to that has to do in the context of the Greek there. When you look at the word that's used, the phrasing that's used for bear one another's burdens, that's a burden that is overwhelming, is what the passage is talking about. And when you're looking in verse 5 at bearing your own load, that's the idea of a burden that's a burden that you can handle and that is your responsibility. And so it's just talking about two different issues in the passage. So again, you can see the context in verse 4. Let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another, for each one shall bear his own load. It's the idea of I've got my own responsibility before the Lord, and it's like I can't. I need to stop paying attention to what God's doing with Matt, and I need to pay attention to what God's doing with me, unless Matt has a burden that Matt can't bear. He's got a lot of those because he's a sensitive soul.
All right, good. Are we ending on that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Hopefully that helps you out.
Okay. I don't think I have a name on this one either. They say thanks for Q&A, and then they say this two-part question. Where do different races come from, since in the beginning it was only Adam and Eve? So we'll start with that one.
The different races come from evolution and the fact that we're all, basically brought about from amoebas and we're
lies.
Yeah. You know what? It's actually a pretty simple thing. When you look at Adam and Eve, what the Bible teaches is that God made the creation complete, perfect, in the sense that there was nothing lacking. And so when you're talking about the genome of Adam and Eve, they had a genome that was without mutations, without any kind of problems at all. And so it's one of the reasons that when you're reading through the book of Genesis, you see these people living so long. And when you go through, we're going through Genesis right now on Sunday mornings, and it's one of the things that I pointed out. When you're going through the book of Genesis, there are these choke points that you get to where all of a sudden the life of people, the lifespan of people go down. And so one of the choke points is at the flood, and another one is at the Tower of Babel. And in both those instances, what you have is situations where the genetics get basically choked off. That's why they're called choke points. So you go down from a genome that has obviously been split out into billions of people before the flood. You could get billions of people before the flood. And you get down to one family. And so there's 8 people. So it goes down from billions to 8 people. And all you have to work with from that point on is the genome of those 8 people. And so you lose lots of information there because the genetic code is like a library, basically. It's like taking multiple encyclopedias and the information that's in them. It's literally like that. And so when you take out a lot of the information with the rest of humanity, then what you're going to get is you're going to get some changes that take place. And one of the changes is the lifespan starts becoming reduced. Then you see the same thing at Babylon. Again, you have the population growing, And then what God does is he disperses that population. And now it's not just to 8 people, but it's to basically little pods of people. And they go off in different places. And they would intermarry among themselves and have children among themselves. But you've isolated the population at that point. And so what again is going to happen is you're going to lose genetic information that you would normally have if everybody was in the same place at the same time. You would have all of Noah's family's genes in the population at the same time. When you take them and you split them off in small areas, you're going to start getting some differences. And those differences are where you get what we in modern times call the races. There are no races in the Bible. And that's one of the points that I want to make with this. We're all one family. The Bible, actually, Paul the Apostle, when he was talking to the Athenians, said that we all come from one blood. Obviously, we all come from Adam, and then later on, we all come from Noah. And so we all come from one blood. So there aren't races in the Bible. You don't see that. What you see is families. And so you have, anytime that you have a nation named, it's usually after the patriarch of that nation. So we've been talking about Jacob and Esau. Jacob has his name changed to Israel. Esau has his name changed to Edom. And so Edom becomes a nation. Israel becomes a nation. And their children down through the ages, down through history after that point, are a part of that nation, right? And so you have that. When you're talking about Shem and Ham and Japheth, actually Shem is the name that we use to get the term Semitic, and so you have the Semitic peoples that are named from Shem, and those are Middle Eastern peoples, basically, and actually Far East peoples too. You have that as far as history goes. The Japhethites generally went north, and that would be the Western or the European peoples, the northern peoples, basically, and then the Hamitic tribes went to the south. Actually, I said the Semitic went to Sinai or went to China. It's not the Semitic; it's the Hamitic. So the Hamitic peoples split, and some went down towards the south, and some went back towards the Far East. And so that's what you have over history. And when you have those groups of people separating like that, what you're going to have is all the genetic information that you have. When you take them and put them in small groups of people, it's going to start coming out. And the best example that I can give you is how they breed dogs. And so when you're breeding dogs all came from wolves. I just saw a meme the other day of a Pomeranian talking to a wolf in the past, basically it was like, talking to your ancestors, saying when this hairless monkey tries to give you food, don't take it. And it's like, because what happened was men domesticated wolves, and then they started breeding them. And so when you take small populations of animals and you inbreed them, basically, what happens is you start getting all this diversity that comes out. And it's just the way that genetics works. And so you get all kinds of different types of animals, and then you take those animals and you start breeding for what you would like them to be. So if you want them to be small, you breed the small animals. If you want them to be large, you breed the large animals. If you want them to have a certain muzzle shape, that's what you're going for. And so that's how you get this to come out. Well, it happens with humans too. And so when you have small breeding populations, genetic differences come out, and depending on situations that you're living in, sometimes it's going to have to do with environment and that kind of thing. So, for example, if you're down in the tropics, if you have a small breeding population and you're getting all the different colors that can come out with a group of people. So you're going to get white people, you're going to get, let's just do it this way, light-skinned people, darker-skinned people, and then really dark people. Let's do it that way. When you're in a tropical area, light-skinned people like me or like my wife are going to get skin cancer and die. if you're walking around without shirts on, and so they're going to have a harder time living in a tropical area. And that's why you have a situation where usually in tropical areas, people who are there are more dark skinned because they're able to survive in that area better. And then when you're talking about going to other areas, lighter skinned people would thrive in places in the far north and that kind of thing. And it's not confined to that, but you have basically that kind of thing going on. You're going to see other differences that take place too that just have to do with body shape. A longer nose can help to make the air warmer before it goes in. And so generally speaking, people who live in colder climates have longer noses. In fact, it's really interesting. I read a book just ages ago about this kind of stuff. There are differences. There are skeletal differences between Europeans and Americans from the same families.
Really?
Yeah, because of what we eat, and because of the basically the change in culture, the change in environment, and that kind of stuff. So Europeans tend to have higher foreheads than Americans do, and so there's all these cool changes that take place, and so some of it has to do with genetics, and some of it has to do with where you're living and that kind of thing. So ultimately, all the information for all the different colors, all the different shapes of your face, of your lips, of your nose, of your eyes, of your ears, everything was contained in the genetic code of Adam and Eve. And then actually more than what we have now. And then when you get to Noah, it was exactly the same kind of thing. They actually had all the genetic coding for everything that we have after that point. And then what happens is people start spreading out, and the differences come out, and so you start seeing those things. One of the things that Adam and Eve cannot be, or Noah and his family cannot be, is white. They cannot be white because white people don't have the genetic coding to get a black child, and they can't be black either, because black people don't have the genetic coding to get a white child. And so what we know from genetics is that both Adam and Eve, and by the way, Adam comes from a term in Hebrew where we get Edom, which means red. It literally means red man, is what Adam means. And so Adam was probably medium brown skin, and so was Noah and his family. They were probably medium brown skin. And they would have some differences there because they're further out from Adam. But again, they can't be black skin, they can't be white skin, because you can't get the other colors of the different peoples on the planet. And I'm on purpose not using the term race. You can't get the different colors of the other peoples on the planet from people who are white or who are black. But you can get them all from people who are medium brown. So.
Okay, two things. So when you have a bottleneck and less people or of one kind breeding, whatever, there's actually more changes. There's more genetic that come out. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it causes recessive traits to come out.
Whereas they'd be hidden if there was more of it.
Larger populations tend to smooth out, and smaller populations tend to show more genetic diversity.
So when you have, like, let's say, we're in the billions, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say that pre-flood they were in the billions, certainly in the millions. And then you go down to 8, whatever, 10, whatever. If you took the whole planet we're on now, we're in the billions, and you pick 10 people, that to me is just this massive bottleneck.
Yeah, it is.
Where you're down to you're missing colors and all kinds of things. So does that mean in Adam and Eve there were way more colors, way more variety than what we have now because of those bottlenecks?
Yeah, there would be way more variety. I don't know about colors. I don't know. It would be a kind of a blend.
Yeah,
it's white to black.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's the amount of melatonin in your skin.
Sure, but when I think of colors or races, I can think of like 5 or 6 that are predominant. And even though there's a mixture, like you can throw them in
I don't
there.
think you're getting green or purple.
Yeah. So you don't think that there were?
Well, I don't. That would be something that you'd have to talk to somebody who knows something about melatonin with.
Yeah.
because that's what gives you your skin color, right? And so you're working with flesh and melatonin, and so however much you get of that determines how dark or light you are. And so that's going to be the range, unless there's another. I guess there could be another chemical that could get you blue. I don't know.
So the
before that
Incredible
point.
Hulk could have existed Adam and Eve. You never know.
Yeah, yeah,
All right, are you good on that?
yeah. I think so.
That's
yeah.
a pretty thorough answer.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions resulting around the same topic. They're from all different people. This is not on purpose, but we're going to be talking about some women's roles
Okay.
in the church. The first one says, can you kindly explain what it means in 1 Corinthians 11 about women and head coverings?
Yeah. When you go through 1 Corinthians 11, a number of things in the passage. This is what the passage says. Let me just read it first off. He says, I want you to know, verse 3, that the head of every man is Christ, the head of the woman is a man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head was shaved. You know what? I need to do something here because my
Computer is beeping.
yeah, we're gonna disconnect. There, take that. Goes on and says, for if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he's the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man is not from woman, but woman from man, nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. For as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman. But all things are from God. Judge among yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it's a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it's a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God. And so we know that what Paul's talking about here is a custom, because he flat out says it. We have no such custom. And the custom has to do with a picture of submission and appropriate behavior, specifically for, well, it's both for men and for women. The word for covering in the passage is the word that was used for veil in ancient times. And so so that's what we're talking about in this passage. We're talking about veils. And when you're here, generally speaking, you would have like a hood. You would take your robe or whatever, and you, if you were a lady, you would bring it up over your head. And a lot of times they had face covering also, and that was for modesty. And the ones who wore those were women who were married. So a woman who was married went around with a veil on. And if you weren't married, if you were pre-marriageable, so little girls didn't have to go around veiled up. But when you were in a position where you were older, you started wearing a covering, and it was for modesty's sake. And that's what the culture was like at the time, whether you're talking about the Middle East or whether you're talking about the area of Greece. That's what the culture was like. And so what Paul's dealing with is a cultural issue there. The only older women who went around unveiled were prostitutes. And so that, again, is a cultural thing. And so it's not to say that any woman who goes around, nowadays without a veil is a prostitute, because we don't have veils in the United States. But that's the situation that was taking place. Looks like what happened here was ladies got saved. And again, you're talking about the church in Corinth, and these people were just a zoo. These people got into all kinds of stuff that, this church was the messiest church that you have in the New Testament. These Paul had to correct these guys on all kinds of different areas. And so it looks like what happened was the ladies were feeling free in Christ, and so they decided that they didn't want to wear veils anymore. And the point that Paul's making in the passage is, if you don't wear a veil, you're dishonoring your husband. If you don't wear a veil, it's like you're dishonoring the Lord because, again, of the culture. And so it's not something that you can take and bring straight across into our culture, except for this. You don't go to church dressed up like a prostitute. That's what it's talking about. Don't go to church dressed up like a prostitute. Not a good idea if you're married to walk around looking like a prostitute. And obviously, we all know what that means, right? And so there's clothing that's appropriate, clothing that's modest, clothing that doesn't dishonor your husband or dishonor the Lord or dishonor your father. These are things that I told my daughter when she was younger. You're not going out wearing that, and that kind of thing. It's usually around junior high that little girls, they want to let everybody know that they're changing. And so there were times when my daughter would wear things that were way too tight, and I didn't let her do that. And sometimes her mom would fight me on it, and I'd just wrestle her to the ground and gag her and get my way in those things. And it's that's all it's talking about. It's talking about appropriate dress and appropriate actions. You don't want the world looking at you as a believer and getting ideas about who you are because of how you dress. And so you see this throughout the New Testament, talking about dressing modestly and not being known for what you wear, instead you're to be known for who you are on the inside and that kind of thing. And that's all this is talking about. So all the way through, it's talking about a veil. It's not talking about a little doily on the top of your head. It's not talking about hats. It's talking about a veil. So,
you know where veils or head coverings came from? Where they started? What culture they started in?
Nope.
So
something that's common to specifically the Middle East, and according to the Bible, everybody came from the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll probably get butchered for this in the world that we live in with the women's rights, but I'm just thinking why people would do that or what the culture is. But one thing that's cool, and I'm not saying that women should put veils on and cover their face or anything, and hating on women or anything. But when you look at that, the whole problem with especially men who are visual, where they're judging people from the outside and stuff like that, to not know what someone looks like, and you just go up and talk to them,
mm-hmm.
like the whole thing changes.
Mm-hmm.
Where now, like, the personality and just getting to know someone, like, you don't know what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
So being friends with somebody or whatever, like, takes away all this baggage, I think, that comes when you have that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I don't know why that popped in my head, but it's like...
ladies would tell you need to get over it, and you need to look at my heart instead of my face.
Yeah, I know they would say that. That's why I'm probably getting cursed right now.
And that's why the Bible says that stuff.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's like you do... you're welcome. If you come to Calvary Chapel, you're welcome to wear what you want to our church. Don't come walking in a thong bikini.
Right.
It's not appropriate. And that kind of thing. There were times when I was, and this always happened in California. It's never happened here really, that I remember. But there were times when we would do baptisms. I would always warn my people before we did baptisms, ladies. It's like you need to think about what you're showing me. What do you want me to see? And that kind of stuff when we're doing baptisms, because there are girls that just came straight out of the world and they're just not thinking that way. They're thinking the way that I came from the world too, and so thinking the same way that everybody in the world thinks, and it's like no big deal and that kind of stuff. And there are times when it is a big deal. So need to be sensitive to what you wear and don't wear around people who are around you. I have to do the same things. There was I worked in construction, and so it was normal for me to work with my shirt off. And so we built the church here, and I thought, oh, all right, I'm going to get a tan. You know? And I have secretaries who are still picking on me about the one day that I had my shirt off. And so
I heard about this.
yes, yeah. Well, it might have been more than one day. But, yeah.
Hey, when it's 117, they can pick away. Shirts are coming off.
I don't know.
What surprised me about this when I went through it, the cultural thing, is the flip side too. It's not just the modesty, but you shouldn't be known for what you wear on the outside. So a lot of people wear garb or cover their hats or bonnets. And again, I'm not picking on them, but their dress style instantly, you are known for what you wear. So of course, modesty is a thing, but it goes the other way too, legalistic wise, where hey, you have these rules, but are you really supposed to be known for that?
Right. Yeah. And so, if you're, one of the things that you want in your life as a man or a woman is when somebody comes up to meet you, they don't necessarily know who you are by what you wear.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to happen that way. They're supposed to know who you are by what you say, by how you act, and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that I need to dress exactly like the world does, because a lot of times the world is way out to lunch. But I can dress in a normal way, and the world will be looking more at, again, what's coming out of my mouth rather than what I have on my body. So I don't go around dressed, in black shirts with the little collar thing going on, because what that's doing is announcing who I'm supposed to be, in the sense that he's got to be a pastor, or he's got to be a priest or something like that. And I don't want people to know me that way. What I want to do is just be dressed normal, and when somebody comes up to me and talks to me, they find out that I'm a Christian because of my character and not because of anything else. And so it's the same thing with ladies, is the idea behind that. And so I think that's how that should go. If I'm in the context of, let's just talk about different cultural settings. When I teach at Calvary Chapel, this is what I'm going to wear tonight. So I'm wearing Levi's in a Kauai t-shirt, right, that I picked up in Hawaii. And so that's what I'm going to wear tonight, because this is Calvary Chapel, and I'm going to wear flip-flops, and because this is Calvary Chapel, and that's what we do. If I was going to be teaching in a Baptist church, different culture, completely different culture. And so I would never show up in t-shirts and jeans. I would find out what they'd like me to wear, and I'd probably be wearing a suit, and I do have a suit. So I don't want to be somebody who's making a statement just based on my clothing. So
I'm going to show up on Sunday in a rocking suit and tie, so you can all judge me.
That's right, and we will.
All right, continuing on the themes with the gals. Michael asked, "Does the Bible say that wives should be stay-at-home moms?"
Let me just read you a passage. This is out of the book of Proverbs, and it's a great passage. So, the wise woman who can find a virtuous wife. This is Proverbs 31:10. For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She's like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. And so there it is, ladies, biblical backup for shopping. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. And so obviously you're talking about a household where she has people who are under her, and she's in charge of them. She considers a field and buys it, so she's into real estate. From her profits, she plants a vineyard, so she's into farming, or at least gardening. She girds herself with strength, strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. It's the idea she's not lazy. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. And this is basically making clothing back at these times. She extends her hand to the poor, Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy, and so again, she's in the community helping people out. She's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. It's the idea that her husband is somebody who's well known as far as in leadership positions. What that's saying is she's the power behind her husband. It's basically what's going on there. She makes linen garments and sells them, supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. On her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you exceed them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. And so again, she's known. Being praised in the gates means she's known in the community. And so there you go. So obviously, when you're talking about raising our families, I think that raising our families are a big, it's a big fat deal, especially in the times that we're living in. And so we need to make sure that we're taking care of our children. As far as education and that kind of thing. I think that if everybody could, I think that the whole idea of homeschool for every family would be a really good idea. Problem with that is not everybody has a gift of teaching in that sense. And so I've known some homeschoolers that just rocked it, and then I've known some other homeschoolers that had some real problems because they couldn't keep up, and the parents just didn't have the talent to be able to do that. And so if you don't have the talent to do that, what we've always done down through the ages is get somebody who does have the talent and pay them and have them teach our kids. And so whether you're talking about ancient Greece or whether you're talking about 18th and 19th century America, or whether you're talking about even modern times, that's the way that's gone. Obviously things are getting problematic with public schools.
Yep.
Because of all the nonsense that they're bringing in. Like literally, kids can't do math anymore, and they don't know anything about history, and they can't read cursive, that kind of thing. My wife she's got a conspiracy theory on can't reading cursive, because if you can't
So
read,
do I.
yeah, if you can't read cursive, you can't read the original documents of the founders, and so and I don't know that people are really trying to do that on purpose, but in any case, I think the kids should be educated. And so we did homeschool for a little while and didn't work out, and so we have a private school, and we've had our kids go to private school and public school when they got older, and that was a mixed bag. Even private school was a mixed bag at times, because when it was in our school, I liked it. There were some issues in other schools, and that kind of thing. So I think you need to be involved in your children's upbringing. You're the one who's supposed to be raising them. It's not babysitters, and it's not school teachers that are supposed to be raising them. And so I would, we always did whatever we could to make sure that happened. And so there were seasons when Bobby stayed at home all the time. She's worked off and on. She works now as a principal at the school.
Yeah, but your kids are all grown up.
Yeah, our kids are grown up. But even when our kids were in school, she was working there, but she was there with them at school. So that was part of the deal with that.
Okay, so let me ask you this. With what you just said, if I'm not with my kids or my wife's not with our kids, then basically the babysitter's raising them. Mm-hmm. The teachers are raising them. Man, I have to have full-on trust that they're, doing what I would do, raising them in the Lord. And even on that note, it's like, do I want someone else raising my kids?
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, not to open up a can of worms, but biblically, like raising our kids up in the Lord, like somebody needs to do that.
Yeah.
And that requires stay at home at least from young till they get into school, but even schools for a certain part of the day, and then they come home. If you're at work all day, like I think a lot of problems we have in our culture now is that you have one parent, maybe. Does it matter if it's the mom or the dad? I have my own opinion, and let me just say this. So there was a time where, my wife went to college. I didn't go to college. I went to a tech school, motorcycles, So there was a time where she made more money than me for a time, and then I got a better job, and then I made more money than her. So there you go. But so there was a time. So if you're looking at financially, there was a time where it would be beneficial for me to stay at home, numbers wise. Does that matter? When I look at that, I'm like, my kids don't want me to stay at home. They want mom to stay at home. Is there a biblical choice in those, or is it, or not?
Well, biblically, the husband's supposed to be like Christ, right?
Yeah.
And so Christ protects and provides and does that kind of stuff. And so, and then you just mentioned what I would say about that. My kids, my kids love me. They'd rather have mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, that's the way it is. And I specifically went after my kids the whole time that they were growing up. It's like I was the yes dad. And so they'd go and ask mom, and mom would go no, and I go, went to the wrong person. Went to the wrong person.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until they got probably into junior high, maybe even high school, that they started figuring out. There was this one time when they wanted something, and they went to mom and started to ask her, and then just went, oh, never mind, and then turned around, came over and asked me. And it was because they finally got it, that, I would let them do things that mom wouldn't. And I'd never let them do crazy things, but I was always in competition with my wife, and it's still like that to this day. My son calls routinely and talks to my wife and doesn't talk to me. And, Nathan, if you're listening to this, I'm a little bitter about that whole thing. Just want you to know you should be talking to me. And it's because there's a different relationship between the kids and the mom. And so, there are situations that people are in because of life, and sometimes it's because of bad choices and that kind of stuff, where you just have no options, and you're not going to be able to do anything about that. It's like if you're a single mom, you have to go to work, and you want to provide for your family. You don't want to be on the government dole and all that kind of stuff. And I understand that. And so that's where family can step in, and people that you trust can step in and help you out. Bible talks about widows and orphans, and a lot of ladies are functional widows because of the lifestyle and the culture that we have. And I understand all that. God understands, and understands it too. But if you've got the ability to have the mom stay at home, I would take advantage of that. Totally.
For sure.
Totally.
For sure.
Because it's just a good thing when it happens. Kids grow up more well-adjusted. There's all kinds of studies that talk about this stuff, and so there's not even a question about it. And most moms are built that way anyway. When we hire single girls, and then they get married, and then they have babies, and I always tell them, you're welcome to continue to work here. And we've got a workplace where, I allow them to bring children to work and that kind of stuff. They don't abuse it, but they're allowed to do that. And most of the ladies who have babies, they opt to stay home because they want to be with their babies.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously something that God's designed and put in the hearts of moms. So,
Yep.
I wouldn't fight that. Kids love it.
All right, TMO Customs on YouTube, Pastor Steve says, what does the Bible say about female ministers? I think we talked about this last week, but wrapping up the gals, what do you say to this?
Well, female ministers, there's a passage in Romans chapter 16 that talks about a couple of them. I commend to you, verse 1, Phoebe, our sister, who is a servant of the church in Cenchrea. Word for servant there is diakonos, and it's where we get our word deacon. So it looks like she was a deacon of the church in Cenchrea. Diakonos just means slave or servant. And that's what deacons were supposed to be. They were supposed to be servants to the church. Obviously, ladies can do that. It goes on in verse 2 and says, that you may receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and assist her in whatever business she has need of you, for indeed she's been a helper of many and of myself also. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their own necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but also the churches of the Gentiles. And so they were known for being a husband and wife team, and specifically a discipleship team. And so you see passages in the New Testament where they're helping new believers out, and they're doing that together. And so those are a couple of passages that speak to that. The only passages that confine a woman's role are in 1 Timothy. I'll just give you one, because we don't need to go on and on with this. This is a question that we get a lot. But in 1 Timothy chapter 2, there's a section that says that talks about the fact that Paul says, I don't permit a woman to teach. This is for chapter 2, verse 12. I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence, for Adam was formed first over a man, but to be in first than Eve, and Adam was not deceived. But the woman being deceived fell into. Then in chapter 3, you have the qualifications of bishops, and they're to be men, it says. And so the word for bishop is a word for overseer, and it's the overseer of a church. It's a pastoral position. And so but then when you get to deacons, it has a term in verse 11, likewise their wives, it says in my translation. Actually in Greek it says the women. And so the word for wife and the woman and the word for man and husband are the same in Greek. And you figure out what we're talking about by context. And the context in this passage looks like it allows women deacons. And like I said, Phoebe in Romans chapter 16 looks to be a woman deacon. And so you're going to get you're going to get people who have a fit about what I just said about women deacons and stuff, and that's okay. It's all right. You're going to have other people who have a fit about what I said about men being the pastor, and that's okay. I don't care. That's what the Bible says. So,
yep.
It's like, and so when you're looking at God kind of pigeonholing women in the Bible, it has to do with the fall and the creation. And so you see that in the context of women in ministry. It doesn't have anything to do with their intelligence. It doesn't have anything to do with their strength. It doesn't have anything to do with their emotional makeup. It has to do with creation and the fall. Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. And so that's the reason that God places the man in charge in the church. And it's the same reason that God puts the man in charge in the marriage. And so he's to be like Christ, and so he's the head, and he's the picture of that whole thing. And she's to be like the church in submission. But before you ever get to that, it talks about the fact that you're to be in submission one to another. So chapter 5, Ephesians 5, verse 22 says, submit to one another. And then in verse 23, it talks about wives submitting to their husbands. So there's mutual submission, but then there's an order in the marriage, and it has to do, again, with the fall and the picture that you have of Christ in the whole thing. And so it's just an order, It's like we do this with all kinds of things. This is in the church, and this is in marriage. And it's in Christian marriage, obviously. When you're outside of a Christian marriage, you're on your own. But when you're inside of a Christian marriage, you're under the Lord. And so God says certain things about these things. And when you're talking about outside of the church and outside of marriage, then you have situations in the Bible where, for example, in the Old Testament, you have Deborah, who's a ruler in Israel. That's what the word judge is talking about. She was a ruler in Israel. So politically, she was in charge during a certain time. She's the only, one of the few that you have in the Old Testament, because it was a male-dominated society, because they fought with swords and axes. And so that's why it was, you had that kind of stuff in Warfare and Kings and that kind of thing. And so, you don't put those restrictions on, for example, women teachers and women politicians and women bosses and that kind of stuff. Women are not generally subject to other men. No man has the right to come up and tell my wife what to do, as if he has authority over her, unless he's a cop or somebody in that kind of position, and so on. It's just in church and in the context of who's ruling the church. So,
all right, there you go. I got a bunch of good ones I want to get into, but we're out of time. So, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Hope you guys have been blessed today. Love doing the show for you guys. It's a real blessing, at least to me. If you have questions, email me, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text or voicemail 707-872-7677. Pastor Steve mentioned that if you want to be baptized next Sunday after third service, we have a baptismal in our outdoor amphitheater. Bring your stuff and we'll baptize you. For you guys that don't know, we have a Sunday morning service at 7:30. That service is in our indoor sanctuary for you guys that want to meet inside. We also have a 9:15 and 11 a.m. outdoor in our amphitheater service. Everything else, all our services are online as well. And we have a 6:30 Wednesday and a Sunday evening. I forgot to mention, you guys, at the beginning, Michelle wanted me to let you know, we have a website for KBLD, which is our radio station, 91.7 here in the Tri-Cities. I don't know, it goes to Spokane. Does that radio station change when it goes out? Or is it still 91.7?
No, it's that's just our teaching program that's up in Spokane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So if you guys go on kbld.com, she says she's posting all of our studies through the week. That Pastor Steve's going Monday through Thursday through the Word, and then Friday is our question and answer show. If you miss a show, you can go on that website, and the last 2 weeks will be on there. So kbld.com, click weekly studies, and you'll be able to catch up anything you missed for the last 2 weeks. So you guys have that. That's all I got for you. God bless you guys. See you next week, Wednesday, 3:30. True Set Free.